in the first 8 months since the coup, since February, we have seen more than 5,000 military attacks, mainly targeting civilian communities or causing harm to them. This is how serious the situation is. And what we have seen now is not only an intensification of IDPs. For example, in Karenni state, more than half of the population of the entire state have become IDPs because of military violence. But then we've also seen activists and other people being chased down by the military, being targeted for killing, attack, and detention by the military. And some of these activists also and local people have to flee to the border. So we already have displaced people and getting more displaced because of military attack, and then people coming from the central cities to seek a shelter in those places. So this is already very clear that there is an immense and intense humanitarian crisis linked between conflict and COVID. And what we have seen is that that situation has gotten so much worse in the border areas. It doesn't require a PhD or a crystal ball to know that aid needs to come through the borders. If you send aid through the center, the junta will interfere. The junta has already demanded the sacking of nearly 300 national staff of international and UN agencies operating in Burma. This is telling us that they're going to really restrict and interfere with the operations of these organizations inside the country. So if we really want to get aid to those who urgently need it, we have to do cross-border aid. We have to do cross-border assistance. Otherwise, it's not going to reach the areas where people need it. Obviously, we are advocating for aid to go across the border, not just 1 or 2 million. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars over the next few years. And for that to happen, then the UN agencies and the big INGOs and governments will have to be involved. And this is where we see it's important for the Thai government to actually work in cooperation with ASEAN and the EU and the UN and other ASEAN dialogue partners to have a multinational cooperation to make this happen. But obviously, for that to really be effective, most of the aid has to be channeled to the ethnic health organizations and other social and education organizations already existing on the border. What we've seen is that all these organizations have been functioning continuously for decades, and they have been doing their work, and they have been doing their work with very little resources. When COVID and the coup hit the country, we saw that many people started doing more work with less resources, and we also saw many human rights activists and other people in the community coming to help them. So the question now is to make sure that resources and supplies are able to cross the border and to go in the hands of locally based service providers who know the need, who know how to get around on the ground and know how to deliver effectively all this aid, including health assistance. That's the most cost effective. So we need on the border a strong international presence to ensure that the aid can cross the border. But then when the aid crosses the border, we should be putting it in the hands of the people on the ground who have been doing this work for decades, who are well experienced, and who are able to scale up their work. In October, more than 350 Myanmar CSOs and about 40 other organizations from around the world jointly wrote to the international financial institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, and Asian Development Bank, urging them to use money that had already been allocated for COVID financing in Burma to change that into cross-border assistance. Because in all these banks allocated more than $800 million for COVID financing in 2021. But when the coup happened, because of civil society pressure, these banks suspended the payments to prevent the money from going to the military junta. So this money has been sitting there. And what we are saying is that you should use this money for cross-border assistance because it's needed. Naypyidaw has been the main problem. The military junta has destroyed health services. They militarized, they took over 51 hospitals. They have been killing, arresting, and persecuting health workers. The World Health Organization says that Burma is now the most dangerous country for health workers. They even committed war crimes by using ambulances and disguising soldiers as doctors and nurses in order to attack local population. So it's very clear that it is illogical and actually extremely dangerous and harmful if any of this COVID money was to go to the military, because the military will use it to harm people, not help them. So this is why we really need to get the money across the border to the ethnic health organizations and other grassroots community groups that have already been working to support communities affected by conflict for many, many decades. Now their workload got much bigger because of the huge amount of displacements because of military violence, but also not just for their community. For example, in Karenni State, where more than half of the people are displaced because of military attacks, but also they have to take care of the more and more people coming from the central zones, from the main cities, who are seeking shelter in these ethnic areas. So it makes sense. It is absolutely logical for aid to cross the border and to be given in the hands of the people who can use it to really help the population. At this time, one of the places which is being so seriously threatened by military is the western border, Chin State and Sagaing region, where people have been targeted with intense military violence. Mindat, Kani, Tantlang, all these places, Kalemio, all these places have been subjected to very intense attack, and it's no longer safe for most of the population. Not only that, the military committed war crimes by blocking flow of life-saving aid. For example, water, medicines, or food. They actually prevented these supplies from reaching the civilian population. UN experts have already expressed alarm that Operation Anoyata, which is targeting the Northwest in Chin State and Sagaing region, is going to be a repeat of what was done to the Rohingya in Rakhine State in 2017. Cross-border assistance at this point is not only about helping people in Burma. It's in the interest of the neighboring countries. It's the self-interest of neighboring countries which will benefit from cross-border assistance. Why? None of these countries can afford to have hundreds of thousands of refugees cross the border, especially when the economy and the region is affected by the COVID pandemic. So it's actually much better for them to allow COVID assistance to flow across the border so that people can be vaccinated and treated, and that there's a COVID buffer zone near their border with Burma. And if there's humanitarian assistance to allow people to survive and sustain themselves, then there will be less of a push for them to try and cross the border, because we have created a safe zone where they can access shelter, food, and medicines, which is what is urgently needed. So we are not just talking about, oh, we have to do this to help the people in Burma. We also have to do this to help the governments and the countries bordering Burma. It's in their interest that there is a comprehensive and systematic cross-border assistance program happening. Obviously, the progress is not going fast enough. Every time we are delaying is more people dying, more children getting sick, more people dying. So I think we really do need to push harder. And the fact that the US has come to the region, the US Ambassador Derek Chollet has come to the region, and secured an agreement with the Thai government is also important. But also it seems so logical. If you look at cross-border assistance, we're looking at tens of millions of dollars, which will also create jobs for local people in Thailand on the border area, in India on the border area, in Bangladesh. So it is actually makes more sense to allow the border to open for humanitarian assistance than to try and deal with the situation by blocking aid and blocking people. It's not going to be sustainable, and we really need to move much faster. You have to understand, when the coup happened, people already started talking about cross-border aid. In March already, there were many meetings from the movement trying to do advocacy to different governments and to the international financial institutions to get cross-border aid happening. But, you know, it's taken so many months to get to this point where it is possible, but we actually cannot afford to wait any longer, because we are seeing the start of the dry season offensive already, and we have to move very, very quickly. When this situation happened, it wasn't the international community that jumped in and helped with cross-border aid. It was local communities. It was the diaspora sending resources to send through, and people were doing that. And even then, sometimes the local authorities was blocking the aid from crossing the border. You know, now, you know, we cannot expect already local communities who have given everything, and the diaspora has been given so much, to keep doing this, because the problem is much bigger than they can handle. We need the resources of the international community, and we need to have a more systematic opening of the border to make sure that the aid can flow to those who need it. Otherwise, we're basically guilty. The international community and the countries that block aid into the border areas are basically guilty of prolonging and intensifying the effects of the war crimes and crimes against humanity that this illegal junta is perpetrating every single day on people of all these different ethnic nationalities and all these diverse communities in Burma. I think what is very clear, the lesson learned now is that we cannot allow impunity to continue. The international community pressured ethnic groups and political groups and women's groups into saying, don't talk so much about impunity or transitional justice, you know, just work with the military. They must be part of the solution. Don't give them a reason to have a coup, and then slowly we can improve. After the NLD wins a second term, things will be much better. Well, after the NLD won a second term, the military had a coup. Whatever we did, it still happened. And I think the lesson learned, which the young and women's voices say very clearly in this movement, is that we cannot accept any type of 2008 constitution. We have to recognize the right to equality and self-determination of different ethnic communities. And we also have to have more respect and human rights protection for all the other minorities, the religious minorities and social minorities in the country. So, you know, what is very clear is the mission here is not about a regime change. It's about a national transformation. If Burma is going to survive as a nation beyond the global challenges that faces in the next few years, we need a transformation, not a regime change.